Picture this. I'm standing in my own driveway at 11 at night, hands zip-tied behind my back, staring up at red and blue lights bouncing off my own garage door because the woman who's lived 4 houses down from me for 6 years looked me dead in the eye and told a police officer she'd never seen this man before in her life. I'd just spent 56 days on an offshore rig in the Gulf, missed my daughter's birthday, and come home 2 weeks early to surprise her. Instead, I got surprised, cuffed, read my rights, on my own front lawn. So, quick question before we get into it. If you came home early and got treated like a criminal in your own driveway, would you fight quiet or would you fight loud? Drop your answer below. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this kind of petty tyranny reaches. My name's Garrett Voss, 44 years old, pipeline welder, divorced, and the only parent my 15-year-old daughter, Wren, has had steady custody of since her mother moved to Denver chasing a guy who sold essential oils out of a van. I'm not a complicated man. I like a clean weld, a cold Dr. Pepper, and a house that's paid off by the time I'm 55. We live in Cedar Hollow Estates, one of those subdivisions that looks like a postcard until you actually have to deal with the people running it. Beige houses, HOA mandated mailbox, posts a community pool that's closed 9 months a year for maintenance. 6 years ago, it seemed like a good deal. Quiet streets, decent schools, a park with a splash pad Wren used to run through, screaming when she still had all her baby teeth. Then Marnie Talcott got herself elected HOA president, and quiet stopped being free. You know the type. Visor even indoors. A clipboard that might as well be surgically attached to her forearm. Measures your grass with an actual ruler. Marnie had been concerned about my house since the week I moved in. The paint shade on my shutters was not approved. My truck was unsightly, even though it's a 2-year-old F-250, not some rust bucket on blocks. But things got personal the year Wren was diagnosed with a connective tissue disorder that flares her joints bad enough some weeks she needs a wheelchair. I built her a ramp off the side porch, aluminum code-compliant painted to match the trim. Marnie sent a violation notice within 4 days. Unauthorized structural modification. Never mind the Fair Housing Act. Never mind the Americans with Disabilities Act, practically screaming from the sidelines. She wanted her fine, and she wanted it to hurt. Quick smell check for you, because if you've never sat through an HOA meeting, you're missing out. It's stale coffee, cheap toner from the copier that only Marnie's allowed to touch, and just a whisper of the lemon pledge she uses on the folding tables before every single session. That smell means something's about to go sideways. I fought the ramp fine, and won barely, and only because Otis Pruitt, a real estate attorney who owes me for the deck I rebuilt on his lake house, wrote one very pointed letter. Marnie backed off the ramp. But she didn't forget. Women like Marnie don't forget. They file. What most people don't understand about a woman like Marnie is that the power isn't really about the rules. Cedar Hollow's covenants run 41 pages, and I'd bet money she's the only resident who's read all 41 twice with a highlighter. The rules are just the excuse. The real thing she's chasing is the look on your face when she tells you no, that flicker of helplessness before you catch yourself. I saw it on my own face the day the ramp notice came, standing in my kitchen, holding a piece of paper that threatened to fine me for building my daughter away into her own house. I promised myself I wouldn't give her that look again. Then the rig company called. 8-week contract, big money, storm season bonus rate out in the Gulf past the horizon, where cell service dies, and the only sound at night is the hum of the generator, and waves slapping the hull like they're annoyed with you too. Good money for a man raising a kid solo. I said yes before I let myself think too hard about missing Wren's birthday. I left her with my sister Sable Reyes, 2 streets over. Gulf War widow runs a bakery downtown, tougher than any Marine I ever worked pipeline next to. I figured Wren was safe. I figured the house would just sit there, quiet, the way houses do. I had no idea Marnie Talcott had been circling my address on a map in her kitchen, like it was a battle plan. Week 1 offshore, I get a text from Sable. Girl, your mailbox has more violation notices than actual mail. I laugh it off. Rig work doesn't leave much room for HOA drama. You're up at 4:30, welding until your hands shake, sleeping in a bunk that smells like diesel and burnt coffee, and there's a particular ache that settles into your shoulders by day 4 that no amount of stretching fixes. I figured Marnie was just doing her usual paperwork tantrum. Faded flag on the porch, trash can left out 4 hours past pickup. Standard Marnie. Then Sable sends photos. 3 notices in 1 week, all citing the same alleged violation: unauthorized vehicle in driveway. Except the vehicle in question is Wren's physical therapist's minivan, parked there twice a week for in-home sessions the school district actually mandates as part of her care plan. Each notice comes with an escalating fine. First one's $50. By notice 3, it's $200 with language about repeat non-compliance, and a not-so-subtle mention of further board action up to and including lien placement. A lien on my house over a physical therapist's minivan. I call the HOA office from a satellite phone that costs about $4 a minute, standing on a deck that's rocking just enough to make you brace your knees without thinking about it. Salt spray needling my face. And I get Marnie's voicemail, chipper, rehearsed, the kind of voice people use when they know they're being recorded and want the recording to sound reasonable. I leave a message, polite, firm. I explain the therapist situation. I ask her to pull the notices. She doesn't call back. She emails the whole board instead, CCing me almost as an afterthought, with a message that reads less like an HOA update and more like a press release. Some residents believe the rules don't apply to them because of special circumstances. The board must remain consistent and fair to all Cedar Hollow families. Takeaway: if an HOA finds you for a caregiver or medical vehicle, get it in writing that the visit is medically necessary. A one-line note from the provider is often enough to force the board to back down, because most state HOA statutes explicitly bar penalizing residents for reasonable accommodations. I think about calling Wren's therapist directly to get that note started immediately, but it's almost midnight back home by the time I finish the call with Otis, and I don't want to wake a woman who's already doing me a favor showing up twice a week to a house full of HOA drama. So I wait until my next window of signal, 2 days later, and get the request moving. 2 days doesn't sound like much until you're the one lying in a rig bunk, doing math on how many more fines might land on your daughter's doorstep before the paperwork catches up. I don't back down either. I have Otis draft a formal accommodation request under the Fair Housing Act, citing Wren's diagnosis, and I have Sable hand-deliver it to the HOA office with a return receipt. It's the opening move. Marnie doesn't know it yet, but I've just started keeping a file. A literal file. Manila folder rig, issue permanent marker across the tab, Cedar Hollow. Every notice, every email, every date and timestamp. I didn't know yet how thick that folder was going to get. I just knew, standing on that rocking deck with salt drying stiff on my forearms, that a woman who finds a physical therapist's minivan isn't not a woman who's going to stop on her own. I call Sable back that night and ask her to do one more thing. Start keeping her own notes too. Dates, times, who says what at the mailbox kiosk, who's been fined for what. She laughs at first, tells me I'm being paranoid 300 miles offshore over some parking tickets. Then I remind her that some parking tickets led to a lien threat over a medical vehicle inside of 2 weeks, and she stops laughing. By the end of the call, she's already got a fresh notebook out on her kitchen table, the kind she uses for bakery inventory. A new page started with today's date underlined twice. She's going to escalate. And when people like Marnie escalate, they eventually make a mistake big enough to hang themselves with. My job was just to be patient enough to let her. Week 3, the fines turn into something with teeth. Sable calls me during my 1 hour of decent signal. I'm leaning against the rail to horizon, doing that flat orange thing it does right before the sun drops. And she says 4 words that make my stomach drop faster than the elevator on this rig ever has. They towed your truck. Not the therapist's minivan, my truck. The F-250 I'd left parked legally in my own driveway, tags current, nothing overdue, got hooked and hauled at 6 in the morning, while Wren was getting ready for school. The tow slip cites unauthorized commercial vehicle, which is news to me, since it's a personal truck that happens to have a small magnetic sign on the door for a side welding gig I do on weekends. One sign, removable. I'd forgotten it was even on there. Cedar Hollow's covenants do technically restrict commercial vehicles, but every state that regulates HOA towing requires notice before a tow. usually 24 to 48 hours, posted on the vehicle itself, plus a chance to cure the violation. Marnie skipped straight to towing. No notice, no warning sticker, just a flatbed at dawn and a $380 recovery fee waiting for me at the impound lot. Ren has to walk to the bus stop that morning without her physical therapy pickup, because the therapist's minivan, remember the unauthorized vehicle from Loop 1, never got its accommodation approved either. Marnie just sat on the paperwork Otis sent. You can practically hear the gravel crunch under that flatbed's tires if you close your eyes. That dry Texas crunch dust kicking up my neighbor Dale Yarrow, watching from his porch with his coffee going cold in his hand, too spineless yet to say a word. I call Sable back and tell her to get the tow slip, get photos of the driveway, no notice sticker residue, nothing, and get a statement from Dale if he'll give one. Then I call Otis. He doesn't even let me finish the sentence before he says, "Illegal tow. Texas Property Code Chapter 209 and the towing statutes both require advance notice for an HOA-initiated tow off private property, unless it's blocking access or a fire lane. Get me everything." Takeaway. An HOA can't just tow your vehicle on a whim. Most states require a posted notice period before towing off your own driveway, and skipping that step can make the tow itself illegal with the HOA on the hook for damages. Otis files a demand letter within 48 hours. Reimburse the $380, formally approve the accommodation request for the therapist, or he's taking it to the state's HOA ombudsman and small claims court. Marnie's response forwarded to me by Sable is one line. The board stands by its decision. Residents who disagree may attend the next open meeting. Sable tells me later that Marnie actually smiled when she wrote it. Not out loud, obviously. Sable wasn't standing over her shoulder. But you could hear it in the phrasing. That particular smugness of someone who thinks the rulebook belongs to her personally. What Marnie doesn't know is that attend the next open meeting is an invitation Otis is going to hold her to a lot more literally than she intends. I read that message standing on a rig platform 300 miles from home, and something in me goes very calm. The kind of calm you feel right before you strike an arc and everything else drops away. She thinks she's dealing with a man who's too far away to fight back. She has no idea I've got 53 days left on this contract, a lawyer who owes me a favor, a sister with a bakery full of gossiping regulars, and a folder that just got a lot thicker. That night, lying in my bunk, listening to the generator hum through the wall, I do something I don't usually let myself do out here. I think about quitting the contract early, flying home, ending this the fast way with a face-to-face conversation Marnie won't enjoy. Otis talks me out of it, the next morning before I even bring it up, like he read my mind through the phone line. The fastest way to lose a fight like this, he says, is to let her make it about your temper instead of her paperwork. Stay offshore, stay patient, let the record build itself. I don't love the advice. I take it anyway because it's the smart move and because somewhere back in Cedar Hollow, my 11-page folder is about to become a lot more interesting. Week 5 is when it stops being about money and starts being personal. Marnie calls a special session of the board the kind of meeting Cedar Hollow's bylaws technically require 72 hours notice for, except word only reaches half the neighborhood because the notice goes up on the community bulletin board at the pool, which has been locked for maintenance since April. Convenient. Sable goes anyway because Sable finds out about everything small-town bakery gossip travels faster than 5G. She sits in the back of the clubhouse, this beige little room that always smells like the inside of a filing cabinet, and listens to Marnie propose something Sable has to repeat to me twice over the phone before I actually believe it. A motion to place a lien on my house, not over the towing fees, not even over the fines, but over accumulated non-compliance, a phrase that isn't in the bylaws anywhere because Marnie's just making it up as she talks. 2 board members hesitate. One of them is Dale Yarrow, the HOA treasurer, porch coffee guy. The one who watched my truck get towed without saying a word, but now he's the one who raises his hand and asks quietly, "Marnie, do we actually have the authority to do this without a hearing?" Marnie steamrolls the question, calls for a vote. It passes 4-1. That night, I'm supposed to be sleeping before a 4:30 call, and instead I'm sitting on the edge of my bunk with my phone brightness cranked all the way up, reading the Texas property code sections Otis texted me. Feeling something twist behind my ribs that isn't quite anger. It's colder than that. It's the feeling you get when you realize somebody's been playing a long game against your kid, and you were 300 miles away the whole time, welding pipe seams in the dark, not knowing. I call Ren. She's 15, trying to sound tough, and she tells me, almost as an afterthought, like it doesn't matter, that some of the other HOA kids have started saying her ramp is why everyone's rent is going up, a rumor with zero basis in reality that could only have started in one place. Marnie's not just fining me anymore. She's turning the neighborhood on my daughter. That's the moment the folder becomes a mission. Takeaway. Most state HOA statutes require formal written notice and a hearing before a board can place a lien on a property. A board that skips this step can have the lien voided outright, and depending on the state, may owe the homeowner damages and attorney's fees for the attempt. I sit with that anger for a long minute before I call anybody. It's a strange thing being furious and helpless at the same time 300 miles from the person you're supposed to protect. I think about calling the school. I think about calling Marnie directly and saying something I'd regret. Instead, I do the thing that's actually going to matter. I open the manila folder on my laptop screen, the digital twin of the one Sable's been keeping, and I start writing down every single date, every fine, every name, in order, like I'm building a weld schedule instead of a legal case. By the time I'm done, it's almost 2 in the morning ship time, and I've got 11 pages. I call Otis at midnight his time. He doesn't complain about the hour, he just says, "Garrett, before you do anything, I need you to answer one question honestly. Do you actually know when Cedar Hollow's HOA was last renewed with the Secretary of State?" I don't. Nobody ever thinks to check that. But something in the way he asks it tells me we're about to find out something Marnie Talcott very much does not want us to know. Turns out the internet works fine even 300 miles offshore if you're desperate enough and willing to pay for the satellite bandwidth. I pull up the Texas Secretary of State's business filing database on my phone at 2 in the morning, squinting against the blue light in a bunk barely wider than my shoulders, and I type in Cedar Hollow Estates Homeowners Association, Inc., status involuntarily terminated 2 years ago. For failure to file the annual franchise tax report and public information report, a paperwork requirement most HOAs treat as an afterthought, but one that, when ignored long enough, results in the state administratively dissolving the corporation entirely. I read it 3 times to make sure I'm not misunderstanding legal jargon at 2 a.m. on 4 hours of sleep. Otis confirms it the second I forward him the screenshot. And he actually laughs, the first time I've heard genuine delight in his voice this whole ordeal. "Garrett," he says, "if the corporate entity was dissolved, then legally speaking the board has had no authority to levy fines, place liens, authorize tows, or really do much of anything as an HOA for 2 years. Every fine since then is potentially void. Every lien is void. She's been running a fake kingdom." That's trick number 1, and it's a big one. Otis digs further while I'm on my next 12-hour shift, and by the time I'm off, he's found trick number 2, Cedar Hollow's reserve fund, the account meant for pool repairs, road resurfacing. The stuff HOA dues are supposed to actually cover has been steadily shrinking for 18 months, with several payments routed to a landscaping company called Bluebonnet Ground Solutions. Public filings show Bluebonnet Ground Solutions is registered to one Marnie D. Talcott. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a rig break room when you tell your crewmates a story like this. The low hum of the generator, somebody's coffee going cold, the smell of grease and salt hanging in the air, and every single one of them leans in closer. Takeaway. You can check any HOA's corporate status for free through your state's Secretary of State business filings. If the entity's been dissolved for failure to file, the board may have zero legal authority to enforce anything, no matter how many notices they've mailed you. I sit with the 2 discoveries side by side for a long while before I say anything to anyone else. The dissolved corporation and the landscaping payments, because together they add up to something bigger than 2 separate mistakes. They add up to a pattern. A woman who lost her legal authority 2 years ago and never told a single homeowner who kept collecting dues and issuing fines and threatening liens the entire time. all while quietly steering neighborhood money toward a company with her own name on the paperwork. That's not sloppy record keeping. That's a person who found a loophole and decided to live inside it. I don't tell Marnie any of this. Not yet. A woman who finds a physical therapist's minivan and tows trucks without notice doesn't deserve a warning shot. She deserves a trap. I've got 14 days left on my contract. I'm supposed to fly home the same week as Ren's birthday. But the storm system building in the Gulf has other plans, and so, as it turns out, do I. The rig gets the evacuation call 4 days later. Tropical systems spinning up faster than the forecasters like, and company policy pulls non-essential crew off 2 weeks ahead of schedule, rather than risk riding it out. I should be disappointed about the lost bonus days. Instead, standing on the helideck with my gear bag over my shoulder, rotor wash snapping my jacket against my ribs, all I feel is a grim kind of gratitude. 14 days early. Just enough time to build something. First call once I'm back on solid ground and have actual signal, Otis. We meet at his office, a converted house near the courthouse that still smells faintly of the previous owner's potpourri under all the legal paper, and he lays it out plain. The dissolved corporate status alone is enough to void every fine and the illegal lien attempt. But he wants more. He wants it undeniable, public, and airtight before we ever confront Marnie directly. If we go to her quiet, he says, she buries it, resigns quietly, and does this exact thing to somebody else in 2 years. If we go public, she can't hide behind the board anymore. So we build the case like you'd build a weld, layer by layer, nothing rushed, nothing skipped. Second stop, Sable's Bakery, after hours, flour dust still hanging in the air under the fluorescent lights. I lay the whole folder out on a flour-dusted prep table. Every fine, every toe slip, the dissolved corporate filing, the Bluebonnet Ground Solutions paperwork, and Sable makes a phone call to every regular who's ever complained to her about Marnie over a cinnamon roll. Turns out that's a lot of people. The Ferraros got fined for a wheelchair ramp of their own. The Okonkwo family got hit with a bogus, unapproved fence stain fine the same month they installed a safety fence for their toddler. Dale Yarrow, it turns out, has been quietly documenting board meeting irregularities for months in a personal notebook, too scared to say anything out loud until now. Third, security. I install 2 weatherproof trail cameras, the kind hunters use motion-activated infrared for night, aimed at my own driveway and porch. Not because I expect trouble, because a man who's just spent 8 weeks getting fined for a minivan and towed without notice has learned not to leave anything to chance. I mount them myself on a Saturday, the smell of fresh-cut Bermuda grass thick in the air, Ren handing these screws from a stepladder below, grinning for the first time in weeks because her dad is home and building something instead of just leaving again. Takeaway. Weatherproof motion-activated cameras aimed at your own property are almost always legal on your own land, and footage from them can become critical evidence if an HOA or anyone else makes false claims about what happened there. Otis drafts a formal legal brief laying out the dissolved corporate status, the illegal lien, the illegal tow, and the misappropriated reserve funds, timed to be presented at Cedar Hollow's mandatory annual meeting, the one meeting every homeowner is entitled to attend, where the board has to face the whole neighborhood at once. 2 weeks out, public record, no hiding behind a locked pool bulletin board this time. Otis and I also spend an afternoon going through exactly what not to do. No confrontations at the mailbox, no angry posts in the neighborhood app, no venting to anyone outside the small circle who already knows. The second this looks like a personal vendetta instead of a documented pattern of misconduct, Otis tells me, tapping the folder for emphasis, she gets to reframe the whole thing as Garrett's just mad about a tow bill. We don't give her that story. So for 2 weeks, I go quiet in the neighborhood, entirely polite waves, nothing more. While behind the scenes the file keeps growing, one certified letter, one public record, one recorded conversation at a time. I don't tell Marnie I'm home early. Nobody does. As far as Cedar Hollow Estates knows, Garrett Voss is still 300 miles offshore, welding pipe in the dark. That's exactly how I want her to think of it right up until the night I pull into my own driveway 2 weeks ahead of schedule, headlights off, engine ticking as it cools in the dark. Except the trap doesn't spring the way I planned. It springs the way real life always does, sideways and immediately. I roll in around 10:30 at night, rig beard still on my face, wearing the same salt-stiff jacket I evacuated in, driving a rental sedan because my truck's still sitting at Otis's cousin's shop, getting the tow damage documented for the case file. No headlights blazing, no announcement. I just want to surprise Wren before her birthday, hug my kid, sleep in my own bed. Marnie Talcott, it turns out, has been running her own little neighborhood watch initiative since the tow incident convinced my absence is somehow suspicious. She sees an unfamiliar sedan pull into my driveway, a bearded stranger get out and walk toward the house with a duffel bag. And instead of doing literally anything reasonable, knocking, calling me, calling Sable, checking the actual homeowner list, she has as HOA president she calls 911 and reports an intruder breaking into a house she claims belongs to a family currently out of town. You can smell the difference between a Gulf rig and a Texas front yard the second you step onto solid ground, cut grass instead of diesel honeysuckle, instead of salt, somebody's sprinkler ticking 2 yards over. And I remember standing there for 1 full second, just breathing it in, right before the world went sideways. 2 patrol units arrive faster than I expect. Spotlights, a voice on a loudspeaker telling me to get on the ground, hands where they can see them. I do exactly what you do when you've spent 8 weeks around men who understand chain of command. I comply immediately, completely, no arguing, hands laced behind my head, face against my own front lawn, gravel from the walkway biting into my cheek. And Marnie standing at the edge of her own yard in a bathrobe, arms crossed, absolutely certain of herself, tells the responding officer on record that she's never seen this man before in her life, and that the real homeowner is currently offshore and would never authorize anyone to be here. They cuff me, not roughly, but they cuff me, while Wren, who heard the sirens and came running out barefoot in her pajamas, is screaming from the porch that it's her dad, and nobody's listening to a 15-year-old over a homeowner in a bathrobe who sounds so calm, so certain, so reasonable. It takes 11 minutes of the longest minutes of my life before Sable arrives breathless, having been called by Wren, and physically produces my driver's license photo next to my actual face for the deputy to compare, along with the mortgage statement she keeps a copy of at her place for emergencies. Deputy Corwin, to his credit, checks it thoroughly, apologizes, and uncuffs me himself. Takeaway: knowingly making a false report to police is a criminal offense in every state. Usually a misdemeanor, sometimes a felony, depending on the outcome. And it can also expose the person making the report to a civil lawsuit for false imprisonment or malicious prosecution. Marnie doesn't apologize. She stands at her fence line in her bathrobe and says loud enough for 3 neighbors to hear over their own porch lights flicking on, "Well, how was I supposed to know he didn't look like himself?" Wren doesn't let it go that easy, though. She stands on the porch in her bare feet, arms crossed, exactly the way I do when I'm holding my temper, and tells Deputy Corwin, loud enough for the whole street to hear, that the woman in the bathrobe has been mailing her family fine notices for a wheelchair ramp for 2 years, and just called the police on her own dad because he grew a beard. Corwin writes every word of it down. I watch Marnie's face do something complicated when she realizes a 15-year-old just handed a police officer a motive. I stand up off my own lawn, gravel-scraped and furious, in a way that runs cold instead of hot. And I look at her, and I say the only thing I trust myself to say out loud. "You're going to wish you'd checked first." Word of the incident is all over Cedar Hollow by breakfast, not because I told anyone, but because 2 patrol cars with spotlights blazing at 10:30 at night is not a subtle event in a subdivision where the biggest news of the month is usually a raccoon in somebody's trash. Marnie panics. Not visibly, Marnie doesn't do visible panic, she does tactical panic. By noon, an email goes out to the entire HOA distribution list, subject line, "A note on neighborhood safety." It doesn't mention my name. It doesn't need to. It talks vaguely about recent concerns regarding unfamiliar individuals on certain properties, and reminds residents to report anything suspicious, even from residents who may be away frequently for work. It's a smear dressed up as a safety bulletin, and it's aimed at painting me, a welder who works offshore to support his disabled daughter, as some kind of absentee threat. Then she goes further. Dale Yarrow calls me that evening, voice tight, and tells me Marnie cornered him at the mailbox kiosk and offered not so subtly to forget a completely unrelated violation notice sitting against Dale's own property if he'd back her publicly at the annual meeting and vote to censure me for creating a disturbance. Dale, God bless him, records the tail end of the conversation on his phone before she notices and hangs up. There's a specific taste that comes with rage. This controlled bitter, like the last quarter-inch of coffee that's been sitting on a burner too long. And I remember drinking exactly that while I listened to Dale's recording on repeat, making sure Otis got a clean copy before anything happened to the original. Takeaway. Attempting to trade favorable treatment or dropped violations for a vote or public support can constitute board misconduct or even bribery under some state HOA statutes, and a recorded admission, even a partial one, can be powerful evidence in a civil or criminal complaint. Marnie's last move, 3 days before the annual meeting, is her boldest. She has Bluebonnet Ground Solutions, her own landscaping company, remember, send a certified letter to every homeowner claiming that unpermitted structural additions on certain properties, my daughter's wheelchair ramp, unmistakably though, again, never named directly, are actively devaluing neighborhood property values by an estimated 8 to 12%, a statistic she has invented entirely out of thin air. No appraisal, no source, nothing. Otis reads that letter and actually sits back in his chair and whistles low, the way you do when you watch somebody load their own gun and hand it to you barrel first. Garrett, he says, she just put a lie about your daughter's medical accommodation in writing, mailed it to 200 households and signed it with a company she personally profits from. I couldn't have scripted this better if she'd paid me to. I don't respond to the letter. I don't post anything online. Don't confront her at the mailbox. Don't give her a single reaction to work with. I just add it to the folder, now 3 inches thick, tabbed, indexed, copied twice, one set in Otis's office safe. Sable, for her part, spends those same 2 days doing what she does best, talking. Every regular who comes through the bakery for a coffee or a dozen kolaches leaves with a gentle reminder that the annual meeting is open to all residents, mandatory notice or not, and that this year might be worth actually showing up to. She doesn't say why. She doesn't have to. Cedar Hollow's grapevine does the rest of the work for her, faster and more thoroughly than any flyer ever could. 2 days left until the annual meeting. Cedar Hollow thinks it's going to be the usual cold coffee folding chairs, Marnie running the show behind her clipboard like she's done for 6 straight years. They have no idea what's about to happen in that beige little clubhouse. The clubhouse is packed the night of the annual meeting. More people than I've ever seen at one of these things because word travels fast in a neighborhood that just watched a welder get cuffed on his own lawn. Folding chairs pulled from the storage closet line every wall. The Ferraros are there, the Okonkwo's, half the block that's quietly hated Marnie Talcott for years, but never had the paperwork to prove why. That same stale coffee, cheap toner, lemon pledge smell fills the room thicker than ever, with 200 extra bodies packed in and underneath it faint the smell of nerves. Marnie's nerves mostly, though. She's hiding it well behind that clipboard. Marnie opens the meeting exactly like she opens every meeting. Crisp, controlled, running through old business like she owns the room, which for 6 years she basically has. She gets through budget approval before Dale Yarrow, treasurer, porch coffee guy, finally does the thing none of us were sure he had in him. He raises his hand during new business and says, voice shaking but clear enough to carry, "Marnie, before we go further, I think residents deserve to know the board hasn't actually had legal authority to operate for the last 2 years." The room goes dead silent. Marnie's smile doesn't move, but her knuckles go white on the clipboard. Otis stands, introduces himself as legal counsel, present on my behalf, and walks the room through it in plain English, no legalese, just facts laid out one after another, like a man setting tools in a row before a job. The corporate dissolution, verified on the Secretary of State's own public website, projected right there on the pull-down screen for everyone to see with their own eyes. Every fine issued in the last 2 years, legally void. The illegal tow no notice posted my truck's actual damage photos next to the towing statute Marnie skipped. The attempted lien filed without a hearing also void, And finally, the one that makes the whole room actually gasp out loud, the Bluebonnet Grounds Solutions payments, HOA Reserve Fund records next to state business registration records, both showing Marnie D. Talcott's name in black and white. I stand up next. I don't yell. I don't need to. I just hold up the tow slip from the night my truck disappeared. The false 911 call logged Deputy Corwin's department confirmed and released to us, and Dale's recording, which he plays himself on his own phone, held up to the room's one working microphone. Marnie's own voice offering to bury his violation in exchange for a vote against me. A patrol unit is parked outside, not for drama, but because filing a false police report is, as Deputy Corwin quietly confirms when he steps in near the back of the room, an active misdemeanor complaint the department is now formally pursuing separate from any HOA business entirely. Marnie tries to interrupt twice first, with a procedural objection about new business not being on the agenda, which Dale calmly overrules by pointing out the agenda item literally reads, Board Accountability Review, and second, with a flat denial that the Bluebonnet Grounds Solutions payments have anything to do with her personally, right up until Otis projects the state business registration page showing her own name as registered agent. That's the moment the room actually starts murmuring, not shouting, not chaos, just 200 people quietly realizing they've been paying dues into somebody's personal landscaping fund for a year and a half. Take away a homeowner facing a corrupt or overreaching HOA board has real tools available: public corporate filing records, state HOA statutes on notice and hearings, and when a false police report is involved, the criminal justice system itself, all of which can be assembled without a single shouting match. Marnie tries one last move. She tries to adjourn the meeting, gaveling the folding table so hard her coffee sloshes over the rim of her mug. Nobody moves. Nobody leaves. The homeowners association she's ruled for 6 years simply quietly refuses to let her leave. The room in charge of anything anymore. Someone in the back, I never do find out who, starts a motion to remove her from the board effective immediately. It doesn't even need much of a speech behind it. The vote passes so fast, Marnie doesn't get a chance to argue, her clipboard still clutched to her chest, as 200 neighbors watch 6 years of petty tyranny end in under 4 minutes. For one long second after the vote, nobody moves. Marnie just stands there at the folding table, gavel still in her hand, looking out at a room full of people who used to flinch when she walked past their yards with a clipboard and a ruler. Then Dale gently holds out his hand for the gavel. She doesn't fight him for it. She sets it down, picks up her purse, and walks out the side door without another word. No dramatic speech, no last threat, just the quiet click of the clubhouse door closing behind her, the loudest sound in the room. Nobody claps. Somehow that feels more satisfying than if they had. The dust settles slower than the meeting did, the way it always does. Marnie Talcott resigns from Bluebonnet Grounds Solutions' HOA landscaping contract within the week once Otis's demand letter makes clear the county attorney's office is reviewing the reserve fund misappropriation for possible restitution. She's not charged criminally over the funds. The board opts for a civil repayment agreement instead, mostly because half of Cedar Hollow just wants their money back more than they want a courtroom drama. But the false 911 report is a separate matter entirely, out of the neighborhood's hands, headed for its own resolution through the county. The kind of thing that follows a person quietly for a long time after the cameras and the clipboard are gone. Dale Yarrow gets voted in as interim HOA president 2 weeks later, mostly because nobody else wants the job, and everybody trusts the guy who finally found his spine at exactly the right moment. His first act in office is refiling Cedar Hollow's corporate paperwork with the state, properly this time, with a calendar reminder set for every single year going forward. His second act is formally approving Wren's ramp 6 years and one absolutely unnecessary battle too late. Along with a written apology, the board votes to enter into the official minutes. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a neighborhood once the drama's actually over. Not the tense quiet of before, but the easy kind, sprinklers ticking at dusk, somebody's dog barking 2 yards over, the smell of somebody's grill going for the first cookout the block's had in years. Wren's birthday, the one I'd missed by 2 weeks, the wrong direction, and then, in a strange twist, Come home just in time to catch turns into a full block party instead of the quiet family dinner we'd planned. Sable brings 4 dozen cupcakes from the bakery. The Ferraros bring a folding table. Even a few people I don't know that well show up because, apparently, watching a corrupt HOA president get walked out of her own clubhouse mid-gavel builds community faster than any potluck sign-up sheet ever could. Out of it all, something good actually takes root. Dale Sable and I start a small fund at the next meeting the Renvos Accessibility Initiative seeded, with part of the reserve fund's recovered money earmarked specifically to help Cedar Hollow families cover home accessibility modifications for veterans and disabled residents without ever having to fight a board for permission again. 2 families sign up for grants within the first month. It's not a scholarship in the traditional sense, but it's the same idea, turning the worst 2 months of my year into something that outlasts Marnie Talcott's clipboard by a long shot. I run into Marnie exactly once more weeks later, in the parking lot of the grocery store on the edge of town. She's got a cart with a bag of mulch and a look on her face like she's bracing for a fight that isn't coming. I don't give her one. I just nod, the way you'd nod at anybody, and keep walking toward my truck. The one I got back from the impound lot. Damage repaired, tow fee refunded with interest per Otis's demand letter. Some victories don't need a speech. They just need you to keep walking steady toward the life you were building the whole time she was trying to stop you. I go back offshore eventually. Different rig, same steady paycheck. But this time I leave with Otis's number saved under emergency, a folder system Sable keeps duplicated at the bakery just in case, and a neighborhood that finally knows exactly what its own governing documents say. So if you've ever had a Karen try to run your own street like her personal kingdom, you already know how this feels. Drop your story below. I read every single one. And if you want the next chapter of Cedar Hollow, because trust me, Dale's already dealing with his own headache from the board members Marnie left behind, hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Yeah, so Garrett didn't win that meeting by yelling louder than anybody. He won it with a folder. 2 years. That's how long that board had been operating without any actual legal authority, and nobody knew because nobody checked. That's the part that gets me every time I read one of these. People think fighting an HOA means showing up angry, matching their energy. And look, I get the impulse. I'd have been angry too, face down on my own lawn. But anger's not what turned that room. It was 2 weeks of just staying quiet, building the file, letting her keep talking. I think about that a lot, actually. How much of this, all of it, depends on you reacting? The second you don't, the whole thing starts to wobble. I want to know if you've got one of these. Maybe not this exact story, but that moment where somebody with a clipboard decided they had more power over your life than they actually did. Put it in the comments. I read all of them, and honestly, some of you have sent me stories that make Cedar Hollow look tame. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe. Share it with somebody who's dealing with their own board right now. There's more of these coming. All right, next one's already in the works.